Good morning. I'd like to welcome you all to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's going to be a long day today. We're going to be spending a lot of time together. So I hope we have some fun and we do some constructive work. Hope you're all feeling chirpy. Let's see how we're going to be feeling in 4 hours' time. I'd just like to start off by thanking Councillor West for helping me as Vice Chair. I will miss you. I'd also like to welcome Councillor Cunningham, who's going to be me and my Vice Chair. So hopefully we'll work together effectively. I don't know if you're aware, but this agenda is going to be divided into two. So we've got a first section, and then we're going to start the second section at 1 o'clock. And we will be moving the key performance indicator item to the first half of the meeting, and it will be coming just after the draft revenue and capital budget proposals. So, and just to say again, so the South West Water item, after that, we'll be adjourning the meeting until 1 o'clock. Any questions? So we start off with item 1, which is apologies for absence. I have Councillor Mann, Councillor Saxby and Councillor Daniel. Councillor Blackman is not here. So are there any other apologies? Thank you very much. So we move on to confirmation of minutes of the meeting of the 15th of October. Are there any questions or concerns about those, please? Can we have a show of hands to say we're happy with them, please? Thank you very much. Is that okay, Kathy? Yeah. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If we carry on at this rate, we'll be finished in 5 minutes. There are no items requiring urgent attention as far as I'm aware. We're not intending to divide the agenda, which I think is part 2, but we'll deal with that if we need to. We have no items for the public forum, so we can move straight on to item 7, which is the draft revenue and capital budget proposals for 2025-26. Is Councillor Ewing introducing this, or do you want to introduce it? Yeah? Just before you start, I'd like to thank you for your presentation last week. That was really appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. I'm very happy to highlight some of the key points in the report, if I may. So this report is looking forward not only for the next financial year, 25-26, and the report sets out proposals for a balanced budget for the next financial year, but we've also looked at the financial position going forward to 26-27 and 27-28, and that's the first diagram there on page 10. So in terms of 26-27, just before Christmas, the government announced the finance settlement, the local government finance settlement for next year. We know there is going to be a multi-year finance settlement for the financial years thereafter. So 26-27, 27-28, that will be part of a multi-year financial settlement. We don't have any figures around that at the moment, but what we do have is we have some modelling tools that we have used, or I have used, to model forward what I think both expenditure will be, but also what income streams we will have coming forward. We know there are going to be local government reforms, so something similar to the Fair Funding Review, whereby basically the funding allocation for all local authorities is going to be redone and redrawn. And as part of that, those funding reforms will come in 26-27. There will be a period of what we call dampening, so any changes in funding will be smoothed in over a couple of financial years, and that is what has been modelled in coming up with the budget gap for 26-27, which I'm predicting to be around 1.6 million. We know the government have repurposed things like the Rural Services Delivery Grant. We have to respond to the financial settlement by tomorrow, and as part of that response, we will be saying that it does cost more to fund services in rural areas, and that is what the Rural Services Delivery Grant used to compensate us as a council for. And the fact that we are losing 0.6 million of funding from that, there certainly wasn't much forewarning in the finance settlement that was going to happen. So I think for rural authorities, that has certainly come as a bit of a surprise. And we will be putting forward our evidence about, it does cost more to run services in rural areas. In the background there, I think it's important to look at what's happened in funding in the past. So if we go back to the position the council was in sort of 2009, 2010, we used to receive core government funding of about £3 million. We don't receive any of that anymore. We get about 112,000 now in revenue support grant. So that has been a significant reduction in core government funding. And obviously, our shared services programme, working in partnership with South Hams, that's allowed us to make savings of over 2.2 million every year. So that has helped us in coping with that reduction in core government funding. Going forward on page 12, I've set out there the key assumptions, because within any medium-term financial strategy, we need to set out what assumptions we've made in that modelling. And members will be familiar with the diagram on page 13, which shows our net budget for the current year of 9.49 million. In terms of the cost pressures, those are set out there on pages 13 and 14. So that is things like temporary accommodation costs. Our current budget is about 298,000. We're recommending increasing the budget for that by 160,000. But we do know we will have things coming on stream that will help us mitigate that cost, things like Plymouth Road and the properties purchased through the Local Authority Housing Fund. Something which is new within next year's budget, and that is the additional employers' national insurance costs. We think that will cost the council an extra £122,000. And from the modelling that we've seen, our allocation of the government compensation grant is probably only going to be about 77,000. So we are only going to be compensated about 2/3 of the additional costs. So again, in our response to the local government finance settlement, we will be saying that we were anticipating that compensation would be 100%, not 2/3. And indeed, many councils are seeing that actually the amount they're being compensated for that additional NI is as much as only 1/3. Because of the way the formula has been allocated, it's likely we'll get about 2/3 of our additional costs. Going forward, I've set out there the changes to the grant income, and on page 16, I've set out the council plan. And as we talked about previously, our year 2 delivery plan, that will be presented to the Hub Committee on the 11th of March, and that will go to council on the 25th of March. And within the report, we do set out the capital bids, which are part of the appendices. But capital bids that's in Appendix E. Capital bids can be added to the capital programme at any point in the financial year. So it isn't the case that capital bids can only be approved prior to the February council meeting. If a capital bid comes along during the financial year that members want to support and approve, that can be added into the capital programme partway through the year. We've set out there on page 17 about the second homes council tax premium. Our share of that as the Borough Council would be just over £80,000, and it's just proposed to transfer that into a housing initiatives reserve to further the council's housing priorities. So that would be spent on housing projects. Earmark reserves, that's set out in section 7. With regard to that, we did, when we were looking at resources for the council plan back in November 23, we identified 1.1 million of earmark reserves and capital resources that could be financing for the council plan. So that's set out on page 18. Going forward in terms of capital programme and borrowing, we've talked about that. Our current borrowing is 27 million as the Borough Council. And in section 10, it does set out the timetable going forward. So we've got today's meeting. There will be a hub committee meeting on the 28th of January, which will recommend final budget proposals to the council. And then we have the full council meeting on the 18th of February. Just very quickly wanted to touch on a couple of points in the appendices with regards to council tax. That's in Appendix C. You can see there on page 30, a 2.99% increase in council tax generates 56,000 for the Borough Council. A 1% increase in council tax generates 56,000, so 2.99%. That would be an increase of £7.82 for the year, or 15 pence per week. So that would equate to a Band E council tax of £269.41. I'm very happy to take questions, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. We've the recommendations for this report are on page 9, and there's our views are sought on the increase in the council tax, the financial pressures, the savings, the net contributions to earmark reserves, and transferring £80,000 from the second homes council tax and the capital bids. So perhaps we could start by asking questions, and then perhaps we could talk about our views on those items. So are there any questions, please? Councillor Vachon.
Thank you, Lisa. As ever, I don't know how you do this. It's magical to my mind. Can we go back to the unearmarked reserves? We see that's pretty high. We're talking about possibility of capital bids coming in during the term. Is that where the capital bids would actually come from? Because, as I say, earmarked reserve seems pretty high there.
Thank you. So, in terms of unearmarked reserves, we've got 1.7 million in unearmarked reserves. And when you benchmark our reserves against other Devon councils in terms of our unearmarked reserves, we would be in the lower part of that. So I regularly look at sort of benchmarking in terms of that. Earmarked reserves, yes, we've got 11.1 million as part of the budget report, which would come forward to the hub committee at the end of January. I modelled those forward, and that 11.1 million is predicted to fall to about 9.5 million. And part of that is because of the funding for the council plan. So that's where the funding is coming out of. We've already identified, over the whole council plan, we've identified 1.1 million. We do think that when we close down our accounts for this financial year, 24-25, I'm expecting us to be underspent by just over 400,000. So the report that will come to the hub committee on the 28th of January, that's still to be published and still to be discussed. But for example, members could set aside, for example, 300,000 of that 400,000 as funding to go back into the council plan. Members could decide to spend that either on revenue projects for the council plan or capital projects. And in terms of capital projects coming forward in the year, so for example, if there are more tranches of the local authority housing fund, and we need to put some match funding towards that, because government give us a certain amount, we have to put some match funding towards it. The council would then have some funding that it could match fund those government funding with. So that can come forward at any point in the financial year. The capital projects that are set out in the appendices are really just the ones that we have at the moment, but members can add to that at any point in the financial year. And indeed, in terms of, we have already gone through the earmarked reserves, but if members want to redo that process, then again, that's something that can be done at any point. As we did in the last financial year when we identified funds for the council plan.
That's fantastic, thank you.
Helpful, thank you.
Councillor Calder.
I'm afraid that my question's already been asked, actually. I've been rather upstaged there, I'm afraid. But can I, whilst I'm speaking, say thank you very much for your expertise? Because to a financial ignoramus such as myself, you make it so much clearer that I can actually even vaguely understand what we're talking about. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Leach.
Yes, I agree with the last speaker. You do a brilliant job. Always have done ever since I've been on the council, so thank you. Question is, how does the proposed budget support our housing priorities, and can those figures that you've just mentioned, either in the underspent or other sections, can that be put into one pot to assist with housing?
Through you, Chairman, thank you. So we have the income from the second homes council tax premium, and our share of that would be 80,000. Members have also approved the West Devon housing offer that we would need, and at the moment that's suggested to be 50,000 per annum. That's part of the bids to the year 2 delivery plan. So that would be furthering our housing objective. We've got the 80,000 money from the second homes council tax, but also, as I say, we can see that it's mainly due to additional Treasury management income that we will have an underspend in this financial year, because interest rates have not dropped as quickly as we were previously forecasting. So that is certainly helping our financial position. If members choose to put that money into the council plan, it will then be for members to decide which of the council's priorities it would want to allocate that against. So that could be housing, that could be climate and biodiversity, whatever members decide. But we certainly do think that there will be opportunities for new rounds of the Local Authority Housing Fund. Spoken to the head of housing about that very recently. And because the council has been very successful in spending the first tranches of that, you know, we've done that very quickly, we've bought the houses quickly. Government can see that we are very proactive in spending that money as soon as we've been allocated the grant. I think that makes our chances of attracting future grant income streams very much higher, because we've got a very successful track record. Helpful.
Just come back. Also, we've got over £2 million, which is underspent from our borrowing. I know that's bringing in an income, but is there anything within that can also be pushed into housing?
It can be, yes. I think what we would need is a business case around that, because although we are over borrowed in terms of the £2 million, if we are going to allocate that to a capital project, that has to be financed. So on a sort of invest to save basis. So if we have a business case whereby spending that £2 million of capital expenditure, for example, if we were to purchase houses and we can get rental income stream from that, and that rental income stream is enough to repay the borrowing, then if that business case sort of stacks up, then yes, it could be used to further the council's housing objective. Similarly, we know that probably we have some demands on that funding from other areas within the council as well. So again, it would be about members looking at that, looking at the capital programme, and seeing what is the best use of that borrowing. But just wanted to stress really that the borrowing has to be repaid, and it has to be on a business case that finances itself. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Guthrie.
It's an impossible question, I think, Lisa, but I'll ask it. Given that normally the sort of prudent management of budgets looks into the future, we make sure we've got a big cushion, but in a way, we're all feeling like there's a new time frame or a potential time frame. So have you had a chance to think about, do we change our focus a little bit about the way we spend? And how can we look at that? Because everybody that I've spoken to, or you're looking across the country or in our room, if you're in the first tranche, it may be within a couple of years you're gone, or 2 or 3 years, but it's going to surely sway our budgets. And probably, I think a lot of members have a view that I won't name names, but of councils or areas that would then take all the money from West Devon if we disappear. And so looking at being prudent and appropriate, but do we have to reset our view on budget?
I'll answer this if I may, Chair. Before I go into that, I'm just going to go back a bit, back a little bit actually, and I'm going to go back to the LGA conference that I attended with the leader and the deputy leader. I'm not sure whether the leader was with me or the deputy leader, but there was a session which had the chief executive of the Rural Services Network, Kerry Booth, and they had the leader of Manchester City Council there. And the question put to them was, what are the priorities likely to be for the government? And each person made a really strong case, inseparable in my mind, as to where they should spend the money. And the Kerry Booth, as the chair of Rural Services Network, did a fantastic job of articulating the pressures that rural councils were under. What I would say from the settlement that we've got is it is absolutely crystal clear what the government has chosen to do. And the recovery fund of 600 million, I think the two largest authorities that received funding were Manchester and Liverpool. And rural councils got very little. So the government direction is really clear. Now, moving forward, I would say, well, actually, sticking in the past, for those members who've been here a long time, they will know that Lisa turns up at these sessions every year, says it's all going to be doom and gloom next year. And I've always thought she's probably been a little bit pessimistic. I actually think at the minute that for next year, Lisa is optimistic. And I think that the multi-year settlement will be really, really dire for rural services and rural councils. So that's the context. So in answer to your question, in the last week, I've been on calls with ministers, MHCLG officials, DCN, LGA, to name but a few. And every time you try and get a straight answer, there's a slightly different version of the truth. I genuinely believe that we are not looking at any form of reorganisation for at least 2 years. And we will have to use I believe, a chunk of our reserves into 26, 27 and possibly 27 and 28. So when we talk about other future successor councils having West Devon's money, we've got to remember it's the residents' money, first and foremost. It's not my money, it's not really your money, it's the residents' money. And we have to make sure that we carry on delivering services until the day that somebody switches the lights off and says, goodbye West Devon Borough Council. So we have to be, I believe, prudent. I think Lisa, I think it's optimistic that we'll only end up with a budget gap of 1.6 million, because I think the government is going to drive forward its agenda as well of reorganisation, will squeeze that. So even if you say, we all say, well, we don't want to reorganise in Devon, I think they will use the twin mechanism of legislation and financial pressure to put us in that position where there is no option for us. So, Leader, I don't know if you want to add any insight onto that.
Could I just respond to that?
Yeah, sure.
So we are dealing with a relevant degree, relevant for this period of time.
I believe so, yeah. I'm more pessimistic than I probably have been in the 10 years I've worked here in terms of the future funding.
I would like to agree with a lot of what Deputy Chief Exec has just said. I've pretty much been in every one of those meetings, and I've done a few extras because last week at the extraordinary meetings, I attended 5 of the 8, 9, I don't know how many there were in Devon, there was loads. Like Steve, I don't believe we're going to go in the first tranche. But at the moment, that's supposition. But we will know by the end of January whether we are or not. That we have been assured letters will be out before the end of January to confirm whether you're on the priority plan or whether you're not. Now, bearing in mind, there is no agreement in Devon on anything, apart from the fact that we do think we should have a strategic, overarching electoral mayor. The only problem with our theory is that Cornwall don't want to enter the game. They were, and then they've taken a huge steps backwards. They have submitted no letter to the government, and neither have they requested postponement of this year's elections, which are due to take place in Cornwall for the whole council. So, bearing those bits in mind, as Lisa and her team know, that we actually, as Steve has said, we have to continue our day job. And our day job is looking after our communities and our residents in West Devon. If we are going to have to hand over the keys and say bye-bye to everyone, don't we want to leave it in the best state we possibly can? We cannot, I have to word this carefully, you never know who's listening these days. We cannot just willy-nilly go and spend our reserves. You have to have a business case and everything else. The government are looking at councils who spend their reserves. Now, at the weekend, I attended a conference, and it was some councils have got tens of millions of reserves. So I did think and sat there a little bit more confidently that they're not going to worry about ours, because nobody is going to get rich on ours. So that gave me a degree of confidence, but not a whole heap. But where we can do things with our money that is for the betterment of our communities, it will have, and I hope every member in this room, their total support. Because if we are disappearing, I think all of us would want to say, I did my best as a councillor for my ward while we were still here. Whether you stand for whatever comes next, and nobody knows, that's up to you. But to know that as a West Devon Borough councillor, you did your best for the area that you live in, some of us still work in, and everything else. We want that for West Devon. So I think looking at the reserves, Lisa, I always tell her she's a pessimist. I've been telling her for 22 years. But this time I do believe her, because the one thing the government know is they are going to squeeze out rural authorities. So actually, why don't we just go for a docking season on the lambs, because we can think about it that way, because we're rural and agricultural and all the rest of it. Why don't we go for that squeeze, because actually it'll make them disappear a damn sight quicker. And that's probably what they're looking for, is to just keep squeezing and squeezing rural authorities until we do bleed dry. And as Lisa will remember, former Councillor Garton always used to sit and say in every meeting on the budget that in West Devon we are excellent at peeling grapes. That was her favourite adage when it came to the budget meetings. We'll have been down to the pips and gone of the grape before much longer. So we need a degree of realism, but Lisa has got time because that degree of realism will be known by the end of January. So we're not agreeing our budget until the 18th of February. So she has got time according to what we know is going to happen to us. Now, if Devon is accepted into the priority first tranche, then we know that we'll be gone within a year or two. So actually, well, 2, possibly 3 years, but she's got an end date in sight. So it does give us the opportunity to be able to say a little bit more of what we want to spend that money on. So I think where we're saying are things we would like today, yes, that's wonderful. We will also probably be doing that at the hub meeting. We may not, if they've already let us know. They've already said that there was 14 letters of intent to postpone the elections. So they're being quite honest with how it's coming out, but it's then looking into individual cases. So we may even know by the hub meeting whether we're in or whether we're out. So it's good to hear that we've got ideas and Lisa can take those down with Pauline and the team. But for the moment, I'm really sorry, but we have to look on the pessimistic side.
Thank you very much. Not sure everybody understood your reference to lambs, but we can cover that again later.
I'm sure everybody in this room knows what docking a lamb is. As the saying goes, Mr. Molyneux, for you, you're a bloomin' northerner.
Can I say, is that like stealing a car or something like that? That's what I would equate it to. That's sort of
Not with
in my
elastic
language.
bands.
Okay, are there any other questions on this subject, please?
Not the docking of lambs.
The question you started, Councillor Guthrie. Can I ask a more mundane question, please? So on page 33 in Appendix C, it talks about business rates from renewables. I mean, what are these and why are they categorised separately, please?
Unfortunately, we do have the head of revenues and benefits in the room as well. I don't know if you want to take that question, Mrs. Hodgkiss, but basically, the reason I've put them separately is because we, as the Borough Council and the Billing Authority, we are allowed to keep 100% of those business rates. So that's why I've identified them separately. We think that for this financial year, it'll be about 276,000 for us and 281,000 going forward. So yeah, that's very helpful, but Jenny will give the detail. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so as Lisa said, we can disregard the business rates income, i.e. keep the business rates income from renewables. We've identified a number of renewables, things like wind turbines, water, solar farms. I think that there are further renewables out there that we are not currently aware of. So the team have been working on going through planning records and doing physical inspections with a view to reporting them. They become subject to business rates and we get to keep the income.
Okay, so this is just businesses, not domestic.
Just businesses, yes.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor West?
Just following up on that, sorry, before you get... Sorry. Are we allowed to look at this retrospectively? Because in my ignorance, I would have assumed if there is a project that we should have been informed about it, and if not, why not? But then the retrospective angle.
Yeah, there's some restrictions on how far back you can go in terms of general regulations, in terms of rating lists and the date that the VO will bring things in. But yeah, we can go back certainly a period of time that's commensurate with a rating list.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Elliott.
Thanks very much, and very much take on board the need to be pessimistic given the changes that are afoot. It was very interesting to hear you talking about our unearmarked reserves and the fact that, you know, you've compared them with other councils and you feel that, or you know from comparing them, that we're in the sort of lower half in terms of their magnitude. So I think it would be really helpful to have some clarity about what the appropriate level of unearmarked reserves is, because at the moment on the record we've got 900,000 as the absolute minimum, 1.25 as the preferred minimum, but then members could take that to mean that anything over 1.25 is actually available for a business case to spend it. So given the amount of uncertainty at the moment, I think it'd be really helpful to have a revised figure with some rationale to say, actually, you know, I think it should be 1.6 or 1.8 or 2 million, whatever it is, so that we know whether we've exceeded that. And it would be good to have it in some way in terms of percentage. I'd be really interested in terms of how we do the comparisons without getting too in the weeds about it, but how we do compare ourselves with other authorities, because I'm aware as a borough we're quite small, and that therefore, you know, we probably need a bit more margin for error. Because we're small, we're going to be less resilient, but equally we should be thinking about it in terms of not absolute values, but percentage of our net budget. But you know that, Lisa, I'm not trying to be patronising. Thank you.
Thank you. So in terms of how we calculate a minimum amount, there isn't a sort of government formula or anything that we need to follow. The government very much say it's down to us as individual councils to set our own minimum amount. And in the past, I've looked at ways that councils have done that and tended to follow how that's been done nationally. And the way we tend to do that is we look at things like probabilities, I suppose, that different scenarios could happen. So we look at what if we were to have a 5% reduction in our income across the board? What if we were to have a 5% reduction in our savings? How much would it be if we had a 5% increase in all of our budget pressures? We look at things like council tax collection rates, so we model what would the financial impact on the council be of a 1% drop in council tax collection rates? What would the effect on the council be of a 1% reduction in the business rate income collection? Then we've got things like our borrowing levels, the interest payments that we're paying on that borrowing, because we've got 27 million at the moment. So there is a risk assessment that we carry out on the reserves that normally forms part of the February budget report to members. And that is the figure that we've come up in the past previously that looks at around £900,000. And the reason that we set that a bit higher at 1.25 million is to acknowledge the fact that when things happen, they don't necessarily happen in a proportionate amount to the size of your budget. So, for example, I was with West Devon when foot and mouth disease happened. We had to very quickly come up with a rate relief system for all of our businesses within the borough. And that is something which had quite a big financial impact on us, although we were able to actually claim a lot of that back through the government's emergency relief scheme. But very initially, we had to respond to that very quickly. It was the same during the pandemic. Obviously, we didn't know what residents' ability to pay their council tax was going to be during the pandemic. We didn't know how businesses were going to be able to pay their business rates or what relief was going to come through from government in terms of business grants. So reserves are there for unforeseen circumstances and for things that you're not expecting, and it is difficult to come up with a sort of formula approach to that, but that's what we try to do. We try to look at things like modelling 5% increases in reductions in income, increases in expenditure, looking at things like council tax collection rates, and looking at the exposure that we've got on things like the amount of borrowing that we've got. But yes, that will come forward to members as part of the February budget report. In terms of, is there any scope to use some of that funding? I think there's scope to use some of the underspend from this financial year, I would say. If you look at comparisons of other Devon authorities, there are only 2 other Devon district councils that have unearmarked reserves lower than us. The rest have all got higher. And I think if you were to ask our auditors whether our levels of reserves are high, low or medium, I think they would say they are low in comparison to our size. But we can support that with benchmarking, and it is difficult to find sort of authorities of a similar size to us. There are some throughout the country, but we are one of the smallest districts and smallest boroughs. So it's trying to get a balance, I think, between considering all of those things. Thank you.
Do you have a follow-up question?
No, that's really helpful and really good to know that we'll have a little bit more detail in the paper that comes to February. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Can I ask a question about temporary accommodation? Because it seems to me that we can't manage or control that, and perhaps we're quite vulnerable to increases in costs there. And I know we're mitigating it through properties coming on stream, but I don't know whether we've got any other thoughts of what we can do about that.
So it's a really good point, Chair, and I nearly raised it when it was the issue of housing was raised by Councillor Leach, because any money we can invest in housing, that therefore it's a double whammy for us, because A, it brings more housing for people, but B, it has the potential to reduce our temporary accommodation costs. So I would support doing everything we can to do everything, spend any money that we have on housing, just so that it can reduce that. But it is out of our control, you're right. Yeah. In terms of the other issue that we have, and Mrs. Blake is at the back of the room, is that the actual availability of temporary accommodation, there's not a lot of it in West Devon. So we're therefore relocating individuals and families potentially out of the borough, and nobody really wants that. So, and it costs more. So
we're planning on buying more properties, or we're just going to carry on and see what happens?
We would, if the opportunity arises, we will always look to try and purchase properties, and if the funding is available, yes.
Thank you. Any more questions before we look for our views on the recommendations, please? Okay, thank you. Let's have a look at the recommendations. It'll be good to hear your views on them. Could we have a look at the first 3, please? Thank you very much. It'd be good to hear your views on these recommendations, please.
Chair.
Yeah.
Are we proposing and seconding the recommendations and then moving into debate?
Probably we should, yeah. Would somebody like to propose the recommendations?
Oh, I can't.
Who would like to propose them, please? Thank you. Second? Yeah. Yeah. Councillor Leach, you happy to second them? Thank you very much. Let's move into debate.
Just to be clear then, Chair, you would like to debate the first recommendations on that page first, and then move on to, yeah?
The first 3, I think, will be fine.
Yeah.
Councillor Leach?
In a way, it's a question and a statement. 2.99 gives us £7.82, which is certainly higher than the alternative of £5. Is there any leeway of maybe going to 2.5% just to help? I know it's by pence. Help our residents out there. I know that it's a knock-on effect to the future because it's an accumulative effect. Whereas our future may only be 3 years, would that be a massive effect?
Thank you. I think one of the points probably within the report is when the government look at our funding for next year, they calculate something called the core spending power. Within that core spending power, they make an assumption that the council will increase its council tax by the maximum amount, the 2.99%. So when government look at our funding going forward, they will assume that the council has increased its council tax by the limit that they have put on district councils. So if 2.5% increase, I can work that out, but I think the point is that you wouldn't have that council tax income, not just for next year, but for every year thereafter, and the cumulative impact of that will be quite significant. And as I say, all of our other income streams, we've got inflationary impacts that we've got to cover. Part of that 1.6 million budget gap for next year is because we've got a lot of additional cost pressures, and we've got no savings yet or additional income coming in to meet it. So if we also cut, council tax makes up about 60-70% of our overall funding. So if we also limit the amount the council tax goes up by, then you're significantly limiting the amount of income the council has to deliver services to residents. That's the key point, I think. So obviously it's a decision for members. Members will have a recorded vote on that at the February council meeting. There's time to look at different scenarios between now and February. But I think the key point is the fact that the government are making the assumption that councils will increase. And when you look at inflation, inflation is currently, well, the November inflation was 2.6%.
As the leader, I would strongly support what Mrs. Buckle has just outlined. I think also if we decrease what we can submit, so 2.5, we have to remember 1% only gets us 56,000. You know, compared to many other councils, that's just pennies and a drop in the ocean. I think going forward, and I recognise where you're coming from, Councillor Leach, I think there are other ways our communities going forward. But I think for the moment, as Lisa has said, we know of what is coming down the line, and potentially we could need every single penny. And also, if we do reduce it, the government will think, well, hang on a minute, where's some of their money? And why do they think they don't need it all of a sudden? Oh yeah, we'll just squeeze them a bit harder. So I think we need to keep to the maximum parameters that we're allowed to. You know, if we were raising 200,000 or something on every 1%, I might feel differently. But when it's only 56%, all you're asking us to dock is 28,000, which is nothing. It might be in our private pockets, I might add, for some of us, but for others, even that could seem like a drop in the ocean. So I think we need to stick with Lisa's advice and to work with this. And then, as she has just said, by the time of the budget, she will have what you have suggested as an option for if that's what people decide. But I will have to say, as the leader and putting this budget forward, I would not be recommending it. Thank you.
I only mentioned it because it's come up in another meeting by somebody else who had that as an idea.
Any more debate on these three items? Should we move on to the next page then, please? mean, for me, as far as the whole thing is concerned, I think you've made it really clear what's happening. And I support the decisions we're making. I think it's an uncomfortable and difficult time. But I think we know where we are, and I think we're being prudent and responsible. That's my comment on that.
Can I just add very quickly, before I came into this meeting, I was on the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. Were talking about their precept and everything. They are still looking at their £14 and they are gaining nearly £6 million, their estimate, Lisa, across Devon and Cornwall for second homes. And they are still looking to increase it by £14. So, you know, we could be feeling a tad guilty about 28,000. We're only getting 80,000, as Mrs. Buckles just said, for second homes council tax. So I think if anywhere we should be really lobbying, and I will be, is the Police Crime Commissioner. That why, you know, when times are really hard, to be able to put it up by £14, which is more than any other precepting authority.
Okay, thank you. Is there any more debate? Shall we move to a vote? So we're looking for...
So can we just go back to the first one? Yeah. So at the minute it says views are sought. So do we need to, in terms of a recommendation, do we need to say that the Overview and Scrutiny Committee supports in principle?
Our suggestion would be, through you, Chair, is that actually, as opposed, if it's the majority members who support what's on the screen today, it'll be in principle support is given to, and that's how it will look in the hub recommendations.
So can we move to a vote on in principle support is given to these 6 recommendations? Are we happy with that? Can we have a show of hands, please?
Let's count to Councillor Ewins then. That's unanimous. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you very much, Lisa. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Ewings. Okay. So we're going to move on to KPIs now. We need to keep a close eye on the time, so perhaps we can move through this fairly quickly, although I don't want to restrict your opportunity for asking questions. Who's going to present this? Councillor Edmonds? Good to see you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for agreeing to move this item up the agenda. Well, this report presents an update on the Council's key performance indicators for the period April to November 2024. These indicators are an important part of the Council's performance management framework and provide valuable insight into the delivery of key services. The Overview and Scrutiny Committee is invited to consider and note the performance data as outlined in Appendix A, which captures the Council's progress towards achieving its operational goals. This report follows previous updates provided to the committee in April and October 2024, ensuring regular and transparent monitoring of service performance. Key highlights of this report include updates on food inspection performance, reflecting the return to broader inspection requirements mandated by the Food Standards Agency post-pandemic. The report emphasises the ongoing efforts to meet annual targets and maintain high standards across key service areas. The key service performance document at Appendix A shows a good level of performance across the key service levels, with just 3 areas below target. They are complaints completed within timescale, temporary accommodation, and revenues calls. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions, please? Can I ask about the percent of cases where homelessness was prevented, please? I see there's 56% of cases where homelessness was prevented. So I'd just like to know about the other 44%, what's likely to have happened to them. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mrs. Blake is making her way up and will be able to answer that question for you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. So with the figure, 56 is still good. It's still more than the Southwest average. The number that the other 44% is a combination of people who just lose contact with us that we don't hear from again. People who there's certain legal definitions of what we can class as prevented and what's not. So if they've not been able to find alternative accommodation within the 56-day period, resulting in them becoming homeless and needing to make a formal homeless approach, so we can't prevent it, so that we then accept a duty, where the advice is provided is not what they want to hear, potentially offered accommodation that is then refused. So it's a combination of all of those things. It won't mean that we just stop working with people or that they're failures as such. It's a bit of a complex definition. So does that make sense? What I've said.
It's always complex, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Councillor Leach?
Yes, it's when it comes to environmental health, so it's food inspections, which is 74%. Slightly concerned about that, because if we aren't covering 100% or can't cover 100%, just one of those establishments could be causing all sorts of problems in the community. It's how is that going to be addressed to try and bring it up to 100%? And while I've got the floor, when it comes to change of circumstances, when it comes to housing benefit, it's November, very good. So our target was 6 days and did it in 3.14. But in the box below, it does say that it could be as low as 1 day. But the longest was 44 days. That does worry me, because when there's a change of any circumstances, benefits completely stop for people. And that just puts them into more debt. So I'm concerned it's got those sort of figures in. I know it's sometimes a problem with people not giving the amount of information, but how are we progressing that information to get it through quicker?
Thank you. I think we have two concerns there. Is Mr. Powell going to answer the first one, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The environmental health one is quite a difficult one to collate. It covers food inspections across a range of different risk premises. And because that sort of cohort of premises changes during the year, you can't set out a programme and say we will do this premises this month all the way through the 12 months, because it's a movable feast effectively, excuse the pun. But what happens is some premises open, some close, some get recategorised in terms of their risk because they're inspected and they move from one to another. So it's really just a showing that against what we know at the beginning of the year, we will inspect all of those premises, but it will change, and therefore it's a cumulative graph showing that by the end of it we will have visited all the ones we should visit, but it changes. So we struggled to come up with something that was really helpful for members, but hopefully at the end of the year you'll see that the majority of the premises have been covered, and those that are high risk and therefore represent the greatest risk to the public as a result of the type of food they handle or produce will have had an inspection based on their rating. Hopefully that helps.
And Jenny, you're going to answer the second part of the question? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, to answer Councillor Leach, you're correct. Obviously, our performance is very good in terms of turning stuff around at one day. However, 44 days isn't really an acceptable level of performance. There is obviously some background and detail to that, in that in terms of the actual nature of the caseload now. The caseload is changing because, as you know, the majority of people are now having their housing costs met through universal credit. So the caseload that the council is left with is more complex. It's a mixture of both homeless cases and cases where people are in supported accommodation. That presents its challenges, particularly in relation to supported accommodation, because we need to ensure that the provider is actually providing accommodation at the right level, that they are not charging excessive amounts. So we are finding that we do have isolated cases where they are taking longer to assess than we would like, because we are requiring more evidence from the landlord.
Very much. Any more questions? Councillor Elliott?
Thank you. So I just wanted to ask about the average temporary accommodation use. So this is on page 87 of our papers. So it's interesting to see that there's obviously some sort of seasonal change in this, because it's gone up quite substantially from April. So I'm looking at the orange line for 24-25. From April through to November, it seems to have increased from maybe 16 to just over 23 as the average temporary accommodation use per month. But in a way, we shouldn't be alarmed about that, because when we look at last year's figures, we also see that sort of seasonal trend of it increasing over the 7 months from April to November. But I also note that it has actually shifted up from last year. So it's just whether there's any sort of background to this for us, for members to understand in a bit more detail why temporary accommodation use is increasing, and whether we would expect this to increase year on year, and whether therefore it should be reflected in our priorities. Thank you.
So it's part of a national trend. It's going up everywhere, sadly. Currently we have 23 households in temporary accommodation. 3 of those have been placed under severe weather, our severe weather protocol, where if the weather is forecast to be below 0, we will accommodate anybody. We have 6 families in temporary accommodation and 17 single people. Now, this has really been the fundamental shift. It's, again, part of the national picture. It's reflected in the housing register. 50% of the housing register is single bed need, and we do not have the availability of 1-bed properties. The private sector remains very high in rental costs for single people. There is an under 35 cap on the rent that's payable to anybody that requires help with their rental costs. In that they're only, if they rent a 1-bed flat, they're only entitled to a shared, what's called a shared room rate. So that again means that there are very few affordable accommodation options for single people. So this is part of the national problem. We need to incentivise the market to build more 1-beds. We need to look at the levels of housing benefit and a housing component of universal credit that's available to single people, and really look as much as possible. We've got real competing pressures around 1-bed accommodation. We've got young people leaving care. We've got older people who are downsizing to make room in family type accommodation through the best use of stock. We don't have availability of houses in multiple occupation that they might have in more urban areas. So it's really challenging around those 1-bed needs, and they're who we are seeing as our long stayers now in temporary accommodation. We are still, West Devon have the lowest figures in temporary accommodation in the county. Just to give you some comparison, Torridge, who's our usual comparer, at the end of Q1, we had 14 in temporary accommodation, and Torwich had 67. So this is a problem that we manage to the best of our ability, but with very limited resources.
That's really interesting. Thank you so much.
Councillor West.
It's sort of a question, but then a statement. So, in terms of still looking at the average temporary accommodation, talks about the increase in August is due to lack of availability on Devon Homes Choice and in the private sector. Do you feel that that's a reflection of the growing trend for landlords to want to offload properties because of the current situation with interest rates and that sort of thing?
I think there's a definite correlation. It's got more and more challenging. It used to be, when I was a frontline homeless officer, relatively easy to move people into the private sector. There are increased, rightly so in a lot of cases, increased rigour around private landlords and the condition, for one, of which they're allowed to let their properties in. And we work really proactively with our environmental health team to make sure that everybody understands what can be done and what hazards are and what can be easily rectified, and loans and grants available through that. There are still lots of landlords that are choosing to leave the sector. That's fact, yeah.
Which, just as a quick comment on that, if I may, Chair, this very much feeds back into the conversation we're having around the budget and the need for the temporary accommodation in one-bedroom places. So, you know, where we've got that funding, we really need to make sure that we focus it towards this area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think we're restricted on time. Councillor Pullin.
Either's fine. I just wanted to raise the issue that although currently numbers are fairly low, the significant squeeze due to the deficit that the government are looking to move into, and that's the squeeze on local public services is going to be significant, especially around children's services. And I think one thing that is likely to be seen in the coming few years is an increase in demand for single dwellings. And I think one of the biggest areas of concern, and it probably won't affect us too much, but are the care leavers, because you are having children as young as 15 being put into single accommodation. And that's, in reality, that should be, I believe, and I think in areas of legislation, clearly down to the remit of social services to provide relevant, safe homes and environments for those children, not to be put in single accommodation. And as services are squeezed, I think those numbers will increase.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yes, so when we place a 16 or 17-year-old in temporary accommodation, which on the very, very few occasions we have had to do, that there is a red flag up to government. We have to explain why we've done that, because it is the expectation, rightly so, that social services find that person a supported lodgings placement rather than them being bed and breakfast with other single people who might have complex and challenging issues. It's very difficult for a very vulnerable young person to manage in that situation. We are already seeing the results of that. You know, we've got Devon County Council has had inadequate children's services for a number of years, so we are seeing young people coming out of that service with no plans at 16, 17 and 18. So we are working really closely with the county on improving that. It's one of the priorities for the chief exec, for our chief exec, to get that really sorted out. But it's a big, complex problem.
Thank you very much. I think we should move on. Can I just ask a final question about the revenue calls answered? I see we're down to 68%. Thank you very much.
So again, you know, this isn't really performance that I would like to be presenting to this committee. What we've found is that because we now have more robust procedures in place in terms of collection, which means that we're sending out more reminders, summonses, so on and so forth in a more regular fashion to assist with collection rates. A lot of that demand is reactive because somebody obviously receives a summons, and quite rightly so, they want to speak with an individual officer to try and rectify that situation. What we're doing as a team, we've recognised that this is an issue that we do need to address in terms of the more proactive work that we can do to encourage people to transact with us online in particular. So we are having weekly meetings with the team. The Deputy Chief Executive also attends those meetings just to kind of improve this performance, look at areas in which we can channel shift where we are able to do so. What I would say, just in terms of a bit of a counterbalance there, just to bring forward some positives, in terms of the latest customer satisfaction survey, residents were very satisfied with the once they actually managed to speak with somebody, they were satisfied with the service that they were getting, scoring it a 4 or a 5. So I think, although there is a wait time that we need to improve on in terms of the actual outcomes and the service that the resident or the business is getting when they manage to speak with somebody, that's all to the good. We have actually seen, it's obviously not presented in this report because of timings, but the December performance for revenues calls was 90%. So I think that we can, we're starting to demonstrate in terms of actually thinking differently about how we use those resources. We are improving our level of performance. And I would hope that future reports that we bring to this committee continue to demonstrate that positive direction of travel.
Thank you very much. Certainly when I'm talking to residents, they're very happy with the service they're receiving from the council, so that's always nice to hear. So would anybody be happy to propose recommendations, which is that we consider and note the key performance indicators for April to November?
I propose.
Councillor Leach. Councillor Secott, happy to second? Yeah. Okay, can we have a show of hands, please? Are you happy with that? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for the report and for answering the questions. Very informative, thank you. Okay, Councillor West, would you like to join us? Councillor West is still the chair of the South West Water Working Group, so he's kindly agreed to come and join in with this part of the session. I hope you're happy with that. Good morning. Thank you very much for joining us. I hope you found something to do while you were waiting. Yeah. So I think you're here to have a conversation with us, aren't you, about the questions we sent to you? Yes. Yeah, and Councillor West is no longer part of the committee, but he's still chair of the working group, so he's joining us as well. So would you like to introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, my name's Alan Burrows. I'm Head of Local Government Liaison. I've been with South West Water nearly 4 years, and previous to that I was at the Environment Agency for 33 years.
Thank you very much.
Good afternoon. My name is Jane O'Connor. I'm the Strategic Wastewater Asset Manager for South West Water. Bring it closer, sorry. Yes, Jane O'Connor, South West Water, and yeah, I've been there for almost 4 years now.
Thank you very much. Do you want to make an introduction, or do you just want us to ask you questions?
What I thought might be helpful is that I've got about 7 slides, so if I go through those, because I think that might answer some of the questions that came up in our pre-meet, if that's okay, and then we can take questions after that if I haven't covered them in there. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So first of all, thanks for inviting us. We were here, I think, roughly this time last year. So I'm going to give a little bit of update on what we've done since we were here last year. I'm going to talk about our priorities, our performance and our investment, but I'm going to try and focus it in following our pre-meet as much as I can do on the West Devon Borough. Maybe some instances where I can't do that at this point, but I'll try my best to do that. So could I have the next slide, please? So our priorities, this is in effect the foundation of our business plan for 2025 to 2030 for South West Water. 4 priorities: water quality and resilience, storm overflows and pollutions, net zero and environmental gains, and delivering for customers and addressing affordability. So if we're going to the next slide, I'll just give you an update on where we are in terms of performance over the last kind of 5-year period. So if you look at pollution incidents in West Devon Borough Council's area, we had 16 in 2020, then 9, then 4, then 8, then 5 last year. None of those were serious incidents. They were categorised by the Environment Agency as a category 3, which is a minor incident. So only 5 in the whole of West Devon Borough area. In terms of storm overflows, when I came last time, I said that we were in the process of having all of our storm overflows monitored now so that we can report on their operations. So all of those are now monitored, 100% of those. And we have to provide a report back to the Environment Agency every year, and that report is published by the Environment Agency in March every year. For West Devon itself, there are 91 bracket 90. Now there's a difference because as our permitting changes, some storm overflows stop operating and some come in. So that number does flex. But if we say it's either 90 or 91 at this point in time, 33 of them already meet the new government targets. So there's no action for us to take. 33 of them already do. So what does that mean for the others? Well, we have a National Storm Overflow Action Plan that we've now produced. And I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But basically what that will show is when each storm overflow is going to get investment within your borough. Now, in the conversations we had previously, I did say that our customer and stakeholder feedback has prompted us to focus in on bathing waters and shellfish waters in the first instance. And if I look at the map of West Devon, there's not a lot of shellfish and bathing waters in West Devon, but there are some environmental sensitive areas where we will be doing some initial investment in 2025 to 2030. And then overall, we're going to be focusing on those storm overflows and delivering that by 2040 for everywhere across the southwest. The government set a target 2050. We're going to aim to deliver the targets by 2040. Last year, particularly for West Devon, we managed to put some interventions in that reduced the number of spills from storm overflows by 852. Across the whole of the southwest region, our interventions reduced spills by just around about 10,500. So we've already started a lot of the work, but the major investment is going to be coming in this next business plan period. The next thing on sewage treatment works, you've got 54 in your area. They're all compliant, and the last time we had a works that failed based on either monitoring we do or monitoring and investigations that the Environment Agency do was in 2017, and that was at Mary Tavy. So there's really good performance within the process treatment within West Devon Borough.
Alan, can I ask a question, please, Chair?
Of course you can.
That last bullet on the storm overflows, 852 in West Devon, in context, is that out of 8 million incidents, or is it out of 8,000 incidents, or is it out of...
I'll clarify that.
Yeah, so in terms of, percentage-wise,
Yeah.
what have you reduced it by, as opposed to 8?
Absolutely.
It sounds great, but if it's out of 8 million, it's not.
It's not 8 million. It's
Right.
it's out of a larger number.
I realise that.
But the majority of the investment is probably going to take place will take place between 2030 and 2040. The figures for reduced bills are probably going to remain lowish for a period of time. There's a slide in a minute that gives a little bit more on that, if that's okay. So next slide, please. So the other thing we committed to do last time we were here was to begin to publish information live so that members of the public, stakeholders could see exactly what was happening and when storm overflows were operating. So we've got now a live site where you can go and click and see if there's a storm overflow operating in your area. You can hone in on West Devon Borough. In fact, you may even be able to go down to parish level, but you can definitely go down to district and borough level. So all that information is available to the public now, and that was as a result of the Government Environment Act 2022 that required water companies to make this information available. The other thing on river water quality, and I know when one of my colleagues, Clarissa, came from the Environment Agency last year, she talked about what water quality is like within West Devon Borough. We've done some analysis of the Environment Agency's data, and our analysis shows that we contribute to around about 15% of the problems for not achieving the required standard in West Devon. So 38 out of 315 reasons for not achieving good status are as a 48, sorry, out of 315 are as a result of activities that South West Water undertake. Some of them may be water quality. Some of them may also be in relation to over-abstraction, abstraction at the wrong place, barriers to fish migration. So they're not all about water quality or pollution issues. And my colleague Jane will be able to answer some questions around that investment in terms of our environmental programme in a moment. Bathing waters, enough said, there aren't any in West Devon, although there was a green recovery pilot on the Tavy where there may be some conversations around whether or not the local community may wish to designate a bathing water on the Tavy, but that's for others to promote, not ourselves. There are no shellfish waters. The other thing that I mentioned at the last meeting is that we were getting a high proportion of pollutions on our network, not at sewage treatment works or pumping stations, but on our network. And we committed to, last year, installing 9,000 sewer level monitors. We've actually installed 12,000 overall now, and we plan to install another 8,000. So those are monitors that sit in our 20,000 kilometres of sewer network around the region that tell us whether or not the sewer is probably operating in the way that it shouldn't. So some of it is, the technology is still quite new, but it does provide some insights as to whether or not a pollution incident may or may not occur. Hence why we can start to reduce those pollutions. And then finally, the environmental programme, which is work that my colleague Caroline Cadman does. We're doing a lot on peatland restoration, on Dartmoor, fish migration and catchment management. And I'll show you a slide on that in a minute. So next slide, if I may, please. There's lots of information out there. Very briefly, the top left-hand side is where you go on our website to look up about storm overflows. If you click on the bathing water bit, it will take you to the map on the right where you can see whether there are storm overflows operating at bathing waters. If you click on the right of the top left box, you'll get to the bottom left box, which shows you all of the storm overflows within West Devon Borough and whether or not they're operating. And the bottom right shows you where our investment is going to be. Within West Devon, I think I've selected on West Devon, and what you can see there is a slow progression of improvement until you get to 2030, then it begins to increase significantly there in terms of our investment, which goes back to the point that I mentioned just now, that we're focusing on bathing waters and brackish waters first. A couple more slides and then I'm done. So this is another blow up of it. So again, in a little bit more detail, depending on what you're interested in, where you're interested in, you can hone into specific locations. If you represent a parish and a ward, you can go straight into there and find out where that investment is. And anybody can go into that site and find out that. But the graph on the bottom left, bottom right, shows what impact we will have over time and the fact that we'll meet the government target where it flatlines by 2040. And then last penultimate slide, this is where our investment's going to be. So Jane and her team shared some of our draft programme on the 21st of November with your officers. In summary, we'll be improving 2 storm overflows. We'll be doing 20 water body improvement schemes. They'll be related primarily to environmental improvement. We'll be doing some investigations to inform our next business plan in 2030 to 2035. And we'll also be doing some what we call water flow installations, so improving the way that our sewage treatment works operate in certain areas. And then the final one, I'll leave a colourful slide to the end. This is all of our environmental programme that we are developing. And the bit that's blown up with Rowford Water Resources Zone is in effect where we're doing environmental enhancements, peatland restoration, invasive species, freshwater fish migration, eel migration works in and around the West Devon Borough patch. So I'm going to pause there, Chair, and really hand over to you for any questions and answers, if that's okay.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for putting together the information for West Devon. I think it makes it come alive for us, and thank you for the draft programme as well. That was really interesting. So do we have any questions, please? Councillor Leach.
Being parochial here, I noticed the rivers that are being mentioned up there are all this side, and didn't see anything for the Ockman River. We have a major sewage plant, Oakhampton, going out there. So is that monitored? And with that detail you just shown, can I go on that and see how many times it's been used as an overflow?
Yes, you can. So I put up the major rivers, the Tavy and the elements of the Tamar, but yes, it includes, so if it's within West Devon, you can go to the Oakman and you can look at exactly what's happening on the Oakman, definitely.
Okay. And also, there's a plant at Folligate, which I believe the waste there is tankered out. Is there details of how much that's increased since we've had quite a lot of houses built in that area?
So the tankering will be for 2 reasons. My mic is on, sorry. So the tankering will be for 2 reasons. For maintenance purposes, where we have to clean the tanks in order to go in and check on the treatment works. It may also be because it produces sludge, pardon the phrase, but solids that we have to take out from that works in order to process before it can be used as a fertiliser for agriculture. So there'll be a number of reasons why there may be tankering works there. Primarily it's either to maintain or to take effluent and sludge away for further processing.
And the reason I ask on that, there's concerns about the extra tankers being brought in or brought out since the new developments have come on stream.
Okay. We'll take that away. There are some specifics, obviously. I can't keep all the information in my head. Apologies, Chair. But we'll take that away, and it might be that that's just an interim measure until some other things need to be put in place. But we'll take that one away and come back to you.
So we have an email address for councillor inquiries, don't we? So
we do.
Can Councillor Leach email in about that question?
So could we get them all in one go, and then we can come back in one go rather than individually? That would be really good. And then
it might be just one.
Well, if there's just one, that's fine.
Councillor Ewings, I think you have a question. Yes, Mandy.
I'm the leader of West Devon, and recently I attended the Water Summit that was held in I can't remember where I went, East Devon, Honiton, the Science Park. A question that's been concerning me for a little while is with climate change, etc., that is, on us. Nobody has talked anywhere about building more reservoirs. Where are you with that as a company and, those sorts of issues? Because we are going to need more reservoirs.
Okay, so I'll answer that in two parts. Firstly, the regulator for water resources is DEFRA, and they do that through the Environment Agency, and the Environment Agency require us to write a water resources management plan. Our current water resources management plan, which is Water Resources Management Plan 24, is just about to be signed off by the Environment Agency on behalf of DEFRA, and in that there will be a number of interventions that will be taking place in order to continue with the ability for us to provide drinking water. Some of those solutions look at moving water from slightly wetter places to slightly drier places in the region. Some of those solutions look at increasing abstraction on certain rivers, and we've got an abstraction licence at Gatherley on the River Tamar, just outside of West Devon, but it's on Gatherley. We're looking at interconnections between our wastewater treatment works, but a reservoir is the last resort in most instances. And the reason why I say that is that they've been promoting a reservoir in southeast England for the last 46 years, and it's only just got approval to go ahead. But there are lots of other things we can do and we need to do before a reservoir is produced. But our water resources management plan is signed off, and it's signed off on the basis that it gives certainty to the regulator that we can provide water through a period of less rainfall and a drought as well.
May I just come back with that? Gatherley I know really well because it's on my family farm. So I know all the mess you're creating and all the rest of it for the residents. But your dates about the 40-odd years would ring true because Rodeford is coming up for 40 years and Meldon is just over 40 years. So within that time, there has been no other reservoirs built in this area or even Cornwall. So, and they're running dry, some of them.
So we do have to provide water up to a certain level of risk from drought, and we have a drought plan that manages that. We also have to do a 25-year look ahead in terms of our strategic water resources. That again is signed off by the Environment Agency and, on behalf of DEFRA. We also look at water efficiency measures. So there is a high per capita consumption of water within the southwest, higher than other parts of the country. Some of that can be mitigated through education. Some of that can be mitigated through changes in building regs control. Some of it can be mitigated through working with manufacturers of high-use washing machines, water machines, things like that. So lots of other things we can do to reduce demand. We have actually implemented a number of new resources in Cornwall, one at Hawks Tor. So as you go down the A30, go around a bend towards Bodmin on the right-hand side, there's an old quarry that we have taken, so that's a new resource. We've also got a new resource at Blackpool Pit, which is an old clay mining area near St Austell. That's another new resource. And we're currently looking at whether or not desalination is an option for Cornwall as well to improve the supply within the Colliford zone as well. Plus we can do things like store more water into the reservoirs when there's excess during the winter. That requires negotiation with the Environment Agency to manage down any potential environmental impact.
Sorry, Mr. Chair. So you are liaising with strategic authorities within Devon about the housing numbers that we have to get built, you know, the 1.5 million, And are those agencies working with you guys to actually work out if there is enough water? Because from plans I've seen for South West Water and research that has been done, because I sit on the Devon Housing Task Force, and that's why the Water Summit was called, because we do have concerns that there could be new towns built, etc. You know, you only have to look at Cranbrook, because I believe there's problems with water and Cranbrook, that the plans don't seem to align anywhere. You know, our local plans now, for ones that are being done brand new, are going into the 2040s. And the best one we could find for South West Water a while ago only goes as far as 2030. So there's no alignment with what local authorities have to have and what you have to have. And I know that you don't comment on planning applications anymore. And just wondered where this alignment and conversation is taking place.
So we do comment on planning applications where there's a need for us to comment on planning applications. So that's not strictly true. We do look at housing targets. We look at the latest USIP climate change predictions. We look at whether or not those housing targets have been met. We look at demand, we look at leakage, we look at per capita consumption, we look at our distribution network, we look at where we can get sources of water from other locations. So we do all of that. If we didn't do that and we didn't do it properly, the Environment Agency would not sign off our water resources management plan. So they audit our plans. So there is a very rigorous process that we go through, which also includes housing targets.
Thank you very much for that.
Councillor Southcott, and then Greenbury Pullin, and then Leach.
Thank you, Chair. Back on the 29th of November, I used the councillor email address and sent in an inquiry, being a little bit specific about one in an area which is in my ward. I inquired about why the reed bed wasn't in use on that particular sewage works when you get continual overflows of foul water going down to the local stream and consequently further down into the river. The reply came back basically saying that we're waiting on Ofwat to agree your plans. So is there finance now available to deal with some of these instances where there is the facility there, if it was in use, to actually reduce pollution right upstream, away from the sea, because a lot of pollution does actually start out in the countryside, on the more of the early part of the river and streams. So have you got that funding now?
So we received, and I'll come to Jane if I may in a minute, but we received the final determination from Ofwat on the 19th of December, in which there were probably tens of thousands of lines of information and hundreds of thousands of cells of information, probably not dissimilar to what you have as a local council when you get your budget, and then you have to work out what does it mean. So we've got all of that information. In terms of, did you say Lewdown itself? Lewdown itself, as a sewage treatment works, is compliant. There are no issues with the treatment process at Lewdown. If it's an issue related to the storm overflow operating, that is within the National Storm Overflow Plan, and I don't know if it's in our plans for 2025 to 2030, because we're focusing on bathing waters and shellfish waters in the first instance. So unfortunately, it may be that it has to wait, because we do have to prioritise somewhere. We can't do everything at once, because customer bills would be so excessive, they would become unaffordable. Tough choices, unfortunately.
Yeah, I appreciate that to a degree, but we have quite a bit of building going on, quite a bit of development in the area, adding a tremendous load on the sewage works, and regrettably, you agreed to surface water from the latest estate being built
being entered into the combined sewer, which is going to cause problems.
So if I could pick that one up, Councillor. So we haven't got the right to refuse surface water. We try to work with developers to make sure that surface water is managed elsewhere, but fundamentally we cannot refuse. Legislation did change in 2023, I think early in 23. That hasn't actually been enacted yet, but we're looking forward to as soon as it does, when we would have the right to refuse, but at this present point in time we can't. Sorry, can you remind me the first part of the development? Yes. So the majority of our treatment works have headroom built in, so we design and build our treatment facilities with a 25 to 40 year life expectancy. We've in the last since 2018-19, we've been working with other water companies, DEFRA, Ofwat, Environment Agency, on drainage and wastewater management plans. Ours were published in 2023. All water companies published theirs in 2023, and we're now working on. This is a cyclical program, so we're now working on the next set. But they all include an assessment of headroom on our treatment work. So headroom is space for growth, really. We have a short list that was approved by Ofwat recently on the 19th of December, where we know we need investment. One of those areas, Cullompton, Exeter, and parts of Plymouth as well. And we have a longer list that we'll be working through for the next cycle and the cycle after that and so on. So this headroom assessment is carried out all the time. It's based on what we know about the physical capacity on the site, what we know and what we continue to learn about the population projections for the area, and also the treatment targets, because treatment targets can tighten, so which means we have to do more with the same asset, or we have to expand our treatment capability. So that is monitored at least annually, and our performance is tracked alongside that as well. So that would start raising red flags if we would start to see deterioration. We would start to see that headroom being eroded as time goes by. So it's on that. It would be picked up as part of that drainage wastewater management plan process.
Fine. I'm aware that we're going to have somewhere, if planning is approved, something like another 90 houses attached to the sewage system, which is probably going to be in excess of what we've already got there. So I hope somewhere along the line that your company is actually consulting with the planning department on that issue. I'll leave it at that.
Councillor Greenberry, Pullin.
Sorry, can I just say we do work with local planning authorities. We do that, and we do look at where there is development coming through. In your strategic local plans, we look at that, and we also look at planning applications. Yes, there will be times when we may not have picked up a planning application, but we do look at planning applications, and we're in a continuous improvement cycle. So it's wrong to say, for the record, we don't look at planning applications. I just want to make sure that that's recorded correctly. Thank you.
Thank you. Greenberry, Pullin.
Thanks for your presentation. I just wanted to double check a few points with you, actually. I don't have specifics on this, but my academic background is connected with environmental issues. My understanding is there are shellfish within our boundaries, which I noted you said there weren't any. So the Tamar, or certainly stretches of the Tamar, would be certainly inhabited by cockles, mussels, well, various bivalves. I have a few points, but that would be one. If you could, perhaps Loppel Dam or someone like that limits that progression of habitat, I don't know.
Shall I answer that question now? So under the Shellfish Waters Directive, areas are designated under the Shellfish Waters Directive, now transposed into the UK law. It's those areas that determine where the investment goes. So there may be shellfish there, but unless it's a designated area, there is no driver for the water company to enable investment to be made, because Ofwat won't agree the investment. People may take cockles, but it may not be a formally designated area.
So for the record, there are areas that shellfish inhabit, natural environments that aren't being protected.
That may be the case.
Okay, thank you. So I was just looking, I believe the Rivers Trust uses your data, live data as well. So I was just looking at the River Trust map, and currently, slightly outside, barring one discharge in Mary Tavy area, there are currently 39 discharges in the region, actively discharging now, and 57 discharges in the last 24 hours. That raises concerns to me more broadly, and when we look at the implementation of improved infrastructure, it does concern me that these discharges will significantly increase when you're looking at multiple thousands of houses being built, because a lot of the wastewater, as you know, is discharged subterranean, discharge in older infrastructure, and there's no easy way to monitor the amount of discharge from decrepit infrastructure which isn't being replaced within new developments. So there is a pollution alert in that area that I'd be really interested to know how South West Water are able to monitor. As I said, we know there's an old sewerage system which needs significant investment, and all of this investment will ultimately boil down to the cost of residents, which led me on to pretty much my final point, that how are you managing water poverty in the region? Because we have the highest water bills, one of the top 3 of the highest water bills in the whole of the UK, I believe. And we also have one of the most significant diverse demographics between wealth and poverty. And we will end up seeing to ensure, I presume, perhaps a little controversially, that the shareholders' profits remain high, the users will have significantly higher bills, and that will increase water poverty, I suspect.
So can I take those points, and forgive me if I forget what you said, but if you could recap. So the issue about shellfish waters, again, it's a little bit like bathing waters. We can only invest in areas where there is a designated bathing water. People might go swimming elsewhere, but we base our investment on what's the designations, because that's where Ofwat would allow us to spend the money. Everything else may need to be discretionary, but as well as that, there are also ecological standards that the Environment Agency set under the Water Framework Directive, which is where we also have to invest. So if the water quality is not being met in certain areas, and we are the cause, as I mentioned in one of the slides up there, we are the cause for 15% for reasons of not achieving good status, then we will put an environmental programme in place to improve that. So that hopefully answers a bit about the shellfish query. Your second point, if you could remind me, Councillor?
Excuse me. One of the points I raised was about the extent of new developments that are forecasted to be built, and I would say that as we know, there's a significant dilapidation of older infrastructure that isn't performing as appropriately as it should be, and therefore there is sewage leakage, subterranean sewage leakage, which is very hard to trace without using more specific forms of scientific tracing. How South West Water managing and monitoring that, because it seems almost impossible to monitor unless you replace the infrastructure, which would, of course, be the cost of the water user.
Yeah, so if I answer part of it and then come to you, James. So there are over 20,000 kilometres of subterranean sewage network in our region, so it would be impractical and impossible to look at every single metre and kilometre of those. So we have to choose carefully based on risk and based on environmental harm where we look. Where we do look, we do use CCTV as a mechanism. I've also I mentioned in my presentation, we've now got in the region of 12,000 sewer level monitors in our network. That's going up to around about 20,000. So that will give us an idea of what's happening on a network as well. So it is like finding a needle in a haystack. We could throw money But equally, we have to be mindful of the fact that it is customer money, and therefore we need to ensure that there's a balance between our operational costs and our capital improvement. It is true to say in the slide that the last treatment works that was not meeting standards was Mary Tavy back in 2017. So a lot of our sewage treatment works are operating within the parameters and standards. And then the final point on storm overflows, we have had to make some tough choices on when we invest, but we've also been guided by Ofwat in terms of where Ofwat has said we need to invest in the first instance, and then that they are in areas where there are designations and areas of high environmental value, so that's where we go in the first instance. So it's the regulator driving it. Customers and stakeholders have also said where they would like us to invest. We can't do it all in one go because there wouldn't be the market out there to deliver it, and the cost to bills would be extortionate because we'd have to pay more over a short period of time. And your final question on affordability, we've set aside £200 million in our business plan to address issues around affordability over the next 5 years.
Okay, it'd be nice if we could finish fairly quickly, but we have 3 people. We have Leach, Viney and Guthrie. So if we could whiz along, that would be good, please.
I just want some clarification. So West Devon at the moment, our housing forecast is about 160 houses per year. Under the government's new formula, we've got something like 430 per year. Our surrounding districts have got a lot more than we have. Have you actually put that amount of houses into your calculations for just water supply, let alone sewage output?
So water supply, yes. We're looking at water supply in terms of impacts on thousands and thousands of properties rather than the tens and tens of properties. So we will look at that, and we look at population statistics and information from the Office of National Statistics, the ONS. In terms of the impact on sewerage treatment, do you mind answering that one, Jane?
Yes. Within the Drainage Wastewater Management Plan, we take a 25-year for... Oh, beg your pardon. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, within the Drainage and Wastewater Management Plan, we take a 25-year look ahead for population data. We take the same population data that's used in the Water Resource Management Plan so that we're all aligned. And we also take the best available climate change forecasts as well. So what comes from that, and we also have the ongoing annual assessment of works performance and works headroom. So we take all of that together and look at where the pinch points are and where development is going to make the difference and tip the balance. It tends, most of our works tend to have quite a lot of headroom in. So it's usually not something that takes us by surprise. It's something we tend to see coming from quite a long way as developments are planned and ultimately delivered. Lost what I was thinking there. Yeah. So, but certainly population forecasts, housing developments are all factored into that. And then we plan the investments that we're going to need over that long 25-year period to pick those up.
Quickly come back. Yes, you've done all this work, but this growth in housing has come as a big surprise from the present government. But it must have been a surprise to all services that this is going to hit us very quickly.
So you're referring to the 1.5 million new homes, the government target. Yeah. So that took us completely by... Well, it had been mentioned, we had heard rumours, but when it was actually published, that was a shock to us. This happened a few weeks before the final determination, which set our level of funding for the next 5 years. And of course, the 1.5 million new homes have to be delivered within the next 5 years as well, because it's in the life of the current Parliament. So what the government did do, what Ofwat have done within the final determination, was include an additional £700 million nationally. So that funding is there. What wasn't clear from their documentation is how water companies can access that funding. But that is something that we would be working through with them as time goes by. That funding is for network improvements, so it's for sewerage networks and it's for pumping stations. So it's to increase capacity there. It isn't to increase treatment capacity. So we would have to fund that another way. And we're working through what that would look like at the moment. So but what we're keen to understand is that at the moment we're completely unsighted on what proportion of the 1.5 million new homes could be within the South West Water region, and also where they could be. So we're trying to reach out to local authorities and like yourselves to understand where we will need to act and where we'll need to invest and to try to see some of this coming. Because this is actually a very short timeline for us. We're used to having a much longer line of sight on things like this. So that's a really good point.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to have to stop questions now, but if we could give our questions to Kathy, then she can send them off. Would you mind answering a couple of questions by email? Would that be okay? Yeah. Yeah. So we could do that, please. We have other people waiting for other sessions, so we need to move on.
Will we have assurance that we're going to get answers to specific questions, specific points?
Yes, you will. But I need to be careful that we we don't breach any GDPR issues, both ourselves and yourselves. We need to be clear that if there's anything under legal proceedings, then we won't be able to answer it. I don't think there is. And if there's anything under commercial confidentiality, that again may be withheld. But we will act to respond. And if we are unable to respond because it may breach one of those, we will also say that. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be the issue.
Just the general tone of it being someone else's problem is, I find a real problem. The children that are swimming in the Walkham, in the Tavy, do not know that those are not designated bathing areas. And the fact that somebody else's problem is really offensive. And every time, if you are in profit as an organisation, those costs should not be passed on to the customers. Your shareholders should be bearing the brunt of that.
Thank you very much. I think we should finish now. It'd be nice. I think we could carry on all afternoon. Thank you very much for coming up and answering the questions, and thank you for getting the West Devon specific information ready. We really appreciate that. So thank you for your time. So we'll officially adjourn the meeting now until 1:30. Give you time to have a sandwich. So thank you very much.